Imagine it's July 25th, 2017. You've just spent $40, maybe more if you sprung for one of the fancier Founders packs, on early access to a new game where you and 3 friends, building forts out of scavenged wood and scrap metal, fighting off waves of zombie things the game calls husks, defend some kind of storm shield generator you're only half paying attention to. The forums are lukewarm. Reviews are landing somewhere around decent but not amazing. You've bought a dozen early access co-op games that have looked exactly like this one, put in a weekend, and quietly stopped playing by the following Tuesday. And some part of you already suspects this is going to be just the same. You've even seen people online joking about this game was announced so long ago, it might never actually come out. You have no idea. Nobody does. Not you, not the other players, not even Epic Games themselves. Then in about 2 months, the same game is going to quietly bolt on a free 100-player mode almost as an afterthought. Something dashed off in a hurry because a different game called PUBG is suddenly everywhere. And that afterthought is going to become the biggest thing gaming has ever produced. School dances are built around it. A dance called the floss taking over the entire internet. An entire generation of kids who couldn't tell you what Save the World even is. Right now, though, none of that has happened yet. Right now, it's just a $40 zombie game that nobody's talking about. But we're talking about it. We're talking about all this and more on This Week in Video Game History. Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Doug Coleman, and this week we're covering the absolutely packed week of July 20th through July 26th. And when I say pack, I mean it. What had to be cut out of this week could make multiple episodes all on their own. But this week gave us a Capcom soldier swinging into a Japanese release so violent it had to be completely rewritten before it ever reached American shelves. A stealth thriller that snuck onto a Nintendo console 4 months after its bigger cousins had already launched everywhere else. A survival horror underdog that spent its entire existence trying to outgross Resident Evil. A grieving ex-cop who discovered he could dodge bullets in slow motion and quietly changed how shooters would play for the next decade. A tropical island full of sword fights and archery that somehow got half of America's grandparents holding a Wii remote. Plus, we're digging into one of Nintendo's biggest hardware gambles, a scrappy indie game that proved a small studio could headline a major storefront, and a $40 zombie game that had absolutely no idea what it was about to become. So grab your controller and press start to continue. Here's what dropped during the week of July 20th through the 26th across 4 different decades. 5 games. Let's run it. July 20th, 1988 in Japan. Capcom releases a Famicom platformer starring a soldier named Lad, and makes one strange design choice that defines the whole game. He can't jump. Instead, he's got a mechanical grappling arm, and you swing him across every stage on it, pulling yourself up ledges, arcing over pits, deflecting bullets mid-swing. It's one of the only platformers ever built around a hero who simply cannot leave the ground on his own power. And it made the game feel like nothing else on the system. But the story underneath that mechanic is the real headline. In Japan, this game was called Hitler's Resurrection, top secret, and it meant exactly what it sounds like. Neo-Nazis, swastikas plastered across every base, and a final boss who is unambiguously a revived Adolf Hitler. Nintendo of America's content guidelines banned that outright for Western releases, so the swastikas became eagles. The villain Wise Man got renamed Kilt, and the game quietly became just Bionic Commando on American shelves. The one thing that somehow survived the cut, a gory ending where the final boss's face explodes. The grappling hook outlived the controversy too. It got a proper remaster in 2009's Bionic Commando Rearmed, and the swing everywhere mechanic still shows up in action games today. July 20th, 2004 in North America. Sam Fisher's second outing finally reaches GameCube 4 months after it had already been out on the Xbox. The console's weaker online infrastructure meant this version showed up fashionably late to its own party. The story sends Fisher into a fictional 2006 Indonesia, where a renegade militia leader has planted a string of smallpox bombs on American soil, using encrypted phone calls to delay each one's release. A genuinely tense premise even by Tom Clancy standards, wrapped in the same shadows and night vision stealth the series had already become known for. But what this game actually gets remembered for is Spies vs. Mercenaries, a lopsided multiplayer mode split between third-person stealth spies armed with tasers and flashbangs and first-person, heavily armed mercenaries hunting them down. It sounds unbalanced on paper, but it played like nothing else in stealth games at the time, and it became a series staple that outlived this particular installment by over a decade. On July 23, 2001, Extermination sent North America forward to Christmas Eve 2005, where a secret American research base buried in Antarctica goes dark. A Force Recon Marine named Dennis Riley gets sent in to investigate. His transport crashes in the tundra, and what he finds inside a facility called Fort Stewart is a bacterium that turns people into something else entirely. Sony used this one to show off the PlayStation 2 at trade shows well before the release, and reviewers immediately clocked the resemblance to John Carpenter's The Thing. Snowbound, isolation, creeping paranoia, an infection that could be sitting right next to you. It landed around 67 on Metacritic, praised for pushing the survivor horror formula a few small steps past what Resident Evil was doing, but knocked it for stiff gameplay and rough voice acting. It never got a sequel, never got a remaster, and never really escaped Resident Evil's shadow. But for anyone who played it, that infection meter ticking up in the corner of the screen was its own particular kind of dread. July 25th, 2001. A New York cop loses his family, goes undercover, gets framed for murder, and discovers partway through his revenge story that he can slow down time and dodge bullets like he stepped into a John Woo film. That was the pitch from Remedy's lead designer, but it was the publisher who pushed back and insisted bullet time couldn't just be a cutscene effect. It had to be something the player controlled themselves on demand in the middle of a firefight. That one note turned a visual effect into a mechanic that defined third-person shooters for the next decade. The whole thing was held together on a shoestring, too. Remedy couldn't afford real actors for the story sequences, so the game's cutscenes were told as a hard-boiled graphic novel, and the face of Max Payne himself belongs to the game's own writer, Sam Lake. Photographed and processed into that gritty noir look, panel by panel, and right now, Remedy is remaking the original 2 Max Payne games from the ground up with Rockstar. No confirmed date yet, but bullet time's about to look brand new all over again. Woohoo Island arrived in North America on July 26, 2009. 12 sports deep, swordplay, archery, dogfighting biplanes, and more, bundled with a little plastic attachment called the Wii Motion Plus. And that bundle mattered more than the destination. That was the first game that actually required Motion Plus's precision tracking, finally answering years of complaints that the original Wii Sports could be beaten by just waggling the remote. It worked. Wii Sports Resort went on to sell well over 33 million copies worldwide, and for a lot of households, it was the second Wii game anyone in the family ever touched, right after the one that came in the box. Woohoo Island didn't stop there either. Nintendo reused it in Wii Fit Plus a few months later, gave it a starring role in Pilot Wings Resort, and eventually paved 3 separate racetracks across it in Mario Kart 7, making this one tropical island one of Nintendo's most recycled pieces of geography. On July 26, 1985, Nintendo packages a small plastic robot with the Famicom. They call it the Robot Operating Buddy, or R.O.B, and the whole plan hinges on it. After the video game crash of '83, American retailers wouldn't touch the words video game console, so Nintendo built the NES Deluxe set around the R.O.B instead. The control deck, the Zapper light gun, Duck Hunt, and 2 robot-compatible games, Gyromite and Stack Up, all bundled together and pitched to Sears and Macy's as a robot playset, not a console. 90-day trial, no money up front, with Nintendo covering the displays and the ad spend. It launched in test markets in New York City that October, then LA, Chicago, and San Francisco, sitting on toy shelves next to Transformers and Teddy Ruxpin. It worked exactly as designed. Once the NES was in the door, R.O.B quietly disappeared. 2 games, ever. That was the whole job. 10 years later, almost to the week, Nintendo took a much bigger swing with nothing to hide behind. On July 21, 1995, the Virtual Boy launches in Japan, designed by Gunpei Yokoi, the same engineer behind the Game Boy and Metroid, a guy who built his whole career on what he called lateral thinking with withered technology, using cheap, mature parts in strange new ways. This time, there was no toy aisle disguise. Nintendo projected 3 million consoles and 14 million games sold. Every cartridge shipped with a built-in reminder to pause every 15 to 30 minutes, because the red monochrome display generally hurt to look at for too long. It sold 770,000 units total before quietly dying within the year, and Yokoi, reportedly unhappy that it had shipped unfinished at all, left Nintendo not long after. One gamble nobody was supposed to notice. One gamble nobody could look away from for all the wrong reasons. And this year, in a twist nobody saw coming, Nintendo brought that second gamble back. Virtual Boy Games hit Switch Online's expansion pack this past February, headset, accessory, and all, so a new generation can get the headache all over again 31 years later. After roughly 6 years in development, announced all the way back in 2011 and joked about as vaporware more than once along the way, Epic Games finally released Fortnite Save the World on July 25th, 2017, a $40 co-op game where you and 3 friends build forts and fight off zombie-like husks. It got decent reviews. Founders packs ran anywhere from $40 to $150. Nobody called it a phenomenon. It was a solid, slightly overdue release that a lot of people quietly forgot within a month. Then PUBG happened. Battle Royale exploded practically overnight in 2017, and Epic, watching from the sidelines with an engine, an audience, and a game already out, pulled its Unreal Tournament team over and built an entire new mode in about 2 months. The plan originally was to bundle it with the paid game. 2 weeks before launch, Epic changed course and spun it off on its own free-to-play release instead, worried the price tag would strangle its growth before it even started. That mode launched September 26th as Fortnite Battle Royale, and within a year, it wasn't just the biggest game in the world, it was a dance craze built on real dances like the floss. A Marshmello concert with over 10 million concurrent viewers, a Travis Scott show that broke the internet, an entire generation's shared language, all funded by its own cosmetic skins rather than a box price. The original planned game just kept sitting there next to all of it. Until this past April, nearly 9 years after it launched, Epic finally made Save the World free too. The afterthought finally caught up with the thing that started it. On July 20th, 2011, 7 people calling themselves Supergiant Games released their first title, Bastion, as the headline act of that year's Xbox Live Arcade Summer of Arcade. Co-founders Amir Rao and Gavin Simon had cut their teeth at EA working on Command & Conquer and Red Alert 3 before striking out on their own. And the promotion they landed on had already been quietly building a reputation, with Braid in the very first Summer of Arcade back in 2008 and Limbo 2 years later in 2010. Bastion's calling card was its reactive narrator. 3,000 lines of dialogue voiced by Logan Cunningham in his very first video game role, timed to react to literally everything the player did, recorded in audio director Darren Korb's actual apartment closet, because that's what the budget allowed. R.O.B also wrote and performed the entire soundtrack himself, a genre he only half-jokingly called acoustic frontier trip hop. None of it looked like it should have worked as well as it did. Bastion sold 500,000 copies within the year and topped 3 million by 2015. And it set Supergiant up to make Transistor, Pyre, and eventually Hades, whose sequel finally rolled out to every platform, PlayStation and Xbox included, just this past April. Imagine it's July 25th, 2017. Somewhere in North Carolina, a small team at Epic Games hits submit on a game that's been 6 years in the making. Announced back when the studio was still known mostly for Unreal Tournament and Gears of War. Delayed more than once. Joked about online as the game that would never actually ship. Tonight, though, it ships. No confetti, no champagne, just a patch note and a store listing next to 100 other games launching that same week. Reviews come in fine, solid. A few people call it fun. Nobody calls it the future. They have no idea that in about 2 months, in a scramble to catch up with the Battle Royale craze they didn't start, someone on that same team is going to bolt a free 100-player mode onto this side of this quiet little game. And that side project is going to eat the main course whole. Not just outgrow it, replace it in most people's minds so completely that for years afterwards, most of the people playing Fortnite won't even know that Save the World exists. That's kind of the shape of this whole week, isn't it? A robot that was never really about the robot. A slow motion effect a publisher refused to let stay decorative. A studio of about 7 people who had no reason to believe their first game would be the one every storefront wanted standing next to it. Nobody in this business ever really knows what they're building. Some of them, they just get lucky enough to find out before the rest of us do. Okay, everybody, that's it for me this episode. As always, this episode's artwork was done by Ms. Tink, with music done by Shane Mandini. This episode was written, produced, and hosted by me, Doug Coleman. Be sure to save your game, nerds. I'll see you next week.